Welcome to the Heal with Kelly podcast. I'm Kelly Noonan-Gorse, and every week I speak to the leading doctors, healers, spiritual teachers, and scientists to find out what is truly possible when it comes to healing. I also interview real people with extraordinary healing stories. My philosophy is, what's possible for one is possible for all. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful journey of remembering our divine nature and tapping into the truths that shall set us free. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Heal with Kelly podcast. Today I am so excited about this conversation. It is such an important one that I didn't realize how important it is actually until I started researching the work of this brilliant man. I have Dr. Dale Bredesen with us. It rhymes with medicine, but we have a different kind of medicine, a holistic approach to treating and potentially reversing Alzheimer's and dementia. So it's a big conversation, and I just want to welcome you to the show before I get into your bio and background.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Great to be here.
Thank you. So yeah, as I was researching, to interview you, my mind was blown. I actually watched your film as well, but for the audience, let me tell them a little bit about you. Dr. Bredesen is an Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative disease researcher and the foremost authority on the reversal of cognitive decline for those experiencing Alzheimer's symptoms. Having spent his career on the forefront of research into the mechanisms of neurodegenerative diseases, Dr. Bredesen and his team at the Bredesen Laboratory have discovered effective therapeutics for Alzheimer's disease. These discoveries have led to the publication of over 200 research papers, as well as the development of the ReCODE Protocol, a multi-step approach designed to reverse the effects of subjective cognitive impairment, SCI, mild cognitive impairment, MCI, and early Alzheimer's disease. The protocol is offered through two programs, the PreCODE program for prevention and the ReCODE program for reversal. Dr. Bredesen is also the author of two New York Times bestsellers, The End of Alzheimer's, the first program to prevent and reverse cognitive decline, and The End of Alzheimer's program. I guess let's start by laying out the state of the world, especially in this country, and Alzheimer's today, because I was blown away by the amount of people it affected and where we're going financially down this trajectory with the treatments that we have right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we are at a real inflection point, a real point of change. So this is now the third leading cause of death in the United States. In the UK, it is the number 2 cause of death. And in women in the UK, it is the number 1 cause of death. And a lot of times people say, well, Alzheimer's, that's old timers disease. Well, things have changed. What's happened is the dramatic increases over the last 15 years have been in the 40-somethings and 50-somethings. So whereas when I was training way back in the 1980s, we never saw people in their 40s and 50s with Alzheimer's. We thought of it as a disease of late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And it's turned out that, first of all, we're seeing it a lot more in 40-somethings and 50-somethings. These were, as I say, the biggest changes have been in that age group. And the second thing we found is that when you get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's related dementia, that is about 20 years on average since the biochemical changes began. So if you get diagnosed when you're 58, you probably had the changes beginning at 38. And what's the good news is there are all sorts of new tests. And one in particular I'm very excited about is a blood test. And it combines looking at p-tau 217. So this is a phosphorylated tau at 217. That's the amino acid number. With another one called GFAP and a third one called NFL. So now, for the first time, you just get a blood test, and you can look and see, okay, do I have early stage Alzheimer's? I may be completely asymptomatic, but the good news is I can see it early, and I can make sure it will never bother me. So we've really gotten to the point where for the first time in history, Alzheimer's is optional. Virtually nobody needs to go on to get Alzheimer-related dementia. And yet we hear all the time, oh my gosh, this is bad. My mother got it, my sister got it, my brother got it, whatever. The reality is if everybody would get evaluated and get on early prevention or earliest treatment, huge difference. And we should at some point maybe talk about there are 4 stages. So you can start really early and you can say, okay, no problem, I'm here. Just like we went from diabetes to pre-diabetes to now insulin resistance, which is pre-diabetes. Same thing has happened with Alzheimer's. We've gone from Alzheimer-related dementia to MCI to SCI to now asymptomatics, where you can pick it up early and make sure you never have problems.
And I mean, we'll get into all the different kind of causes, but there's certainly a genetic,
Yes.
string attached. So if we can test, we should be on this. Anyone with Alzheimer's in their lineage should be on this protocol kind of, or a prevention process, their whole life, really.
Yeah, really, we think in terms of, once you hit 35, you should go ahead and be on active prevention, get an evaluation, we call the evaluation a cognoscopy. Just like when you turn 50, you get a colonoscopy. And actually, my wife and I, when we turned 50, we were not really interested in doing this. So we said, okay, let's just go on Valentine's Day. We'll have his and hers colonoscopies and get it over with. So we went on Valentine's Day, got our his and hers, and just, get it over with.
Oh my God.
So now we recommend everyone, if you're 35 or over, please have a cognoscopy, get on active prevention so that you never have to worry about this. And great news is you can now even look to see, am I headed for this, which wasn't available even 5 years ago. So the times have really changed, and there is just so much can be done. Now, you mentioned genetics. The way to start with the genetics, the most important is, are you a woman or a man genetically? So if you have 2 X chromosomes, you are at increased risk. It's about double. So as Maria Shriver has pointed out, about 65% of people with Alzheimer's are women, about 60% of the caregivers. So it is a woman-centric disease. And actually, Maria has set up a wonderful program to do research for women in Alzheimer's disease. What happens is there are a couple of different mechanisms that have been discovered. One of them, of course, is the change with menopause, so that you have this rather dramatic reduction in many people in estradiol and progesterone. And when you reduce that support for the brain literally has to start pulling back. And so that is an important part of what we look at. Is your brain supported by all these many, as you indicated, many different factors that are all key? And they fall into a few groups, but it's critical to understand, are you losing that support? Now, in contrast, of course, men will, with their andropause, will go down on their testosterone more slowly, whereas the estradiol change is more rapid. So you're pulling back that support from your synaptic network. The other thing that's really interesting, there is a set of genes, it's called XIST, X-I-S-T. Check it out. This is how you inactivate. As you know, Mary Lyon, many, many years ago, came up with the Lyon hypothesis, where when you've got 2 X chromosomes, you can't have everything coming from both. That's too much. So what you have to do is you have to inactivate one. And so what happens is you inactivate the paternal one and the maternal one randomly in humans. So that now when you inactivate those, you use this phenomenon of XIST, which basically turns down one so that the one is then in each cell, it's different. And so you get dominant. It may be the paternal, it may be the maternal. That mechanism can break down over time, so that you now have a change, and that seems to have an increase, that seems to increase your risk for Alzheimer's disease. So there are these multiple mechanisms, but whatever it is more common if you are a woman than a man. You're at increased risk for Alzheimer's. Men are at increased risk compared to women for Parkinson's and for ALS, but at reduced risk, of course, for Alzheimer's disease. So again, if you are a woman, please get evaluated. Let's make sure that we really reduce the global burden of dementia. We can do that now.
It's amazing. What is a cognoscopy? What does that entail?
Yeah, great point. So cognoscopy is pretty easy. Actually, you can even go online, My Cognoscopy, and see this. And so it entails 3 things. Number 1, you want to have a series of blood tests that just tells you, do you have the things that are suggested? Do you? So we have the new one that I mentioned that tells you if you have the problem. Then there's a set that tells you why you have the problem. Is your methylation too low? Is your inflammation too high? Are your energetics too low? Are your mitochondria not functioning up to speed? Do you have sleep apnea? All these things are critical. So you got the testing up front, which is, again, mostly blood tests. Things like sleep apnea, by the way, wearables, so incredibly helpful. So you check your sleep at night. If you have an Oura ring, you can do that. Look at your oxygenation. It should not be coming below 92%. Look at your REM sleep. You want to get at least an hour and a half. Look at your deep sleep. You want to at least get 1 hour. And look at your total sleep, and you want to get at least 7 hours a night. If you're failing those things over time, that's going to give you an increased potential. Sleep apnea, a common one. Oral microbiome, another common one. So the bottom line is, number one on Cognoscopy is the blood tests. Number two is simple online cognitive assessments. See where you stand, because this problem sneaks up on you. We had a woman a few years ago. She was in her late 40s. She said, Alzheimer's runs in my family. I think I'm okay, but I just want to check and see if things are okay. She did a MoCA test, which is a Montreal Cognitive Assessment. It's a 30-point scale, and most people should be 28, 29, 30. She scored a 23. So she already was in that third of 4 phases, which is called mild cognitive impairment.
Yeah.
She got on our protocol. She went up to a perfect 30, did great. So get in early and do the right thing. So it's good to check because, as I say, it can sneak up on you. You don't realize that you've lost things. And then the third piece is, if you're having problems already, you should include an MRI with volumetrics. But if you're not, that's optional. If you're doing well, you can forget the MRI. Again, we, like never before, we can tell you where you stand, and we can tell you why you're there and what your risk factors are. And we can address those. So the protocol that we developed and published as the first reversals of cognitive decline a decade ago, based on just finding those things, identifying the things that are driving the process. They're a little different for each person. And then you want to go after those things. If there's sleep apnea, do it. If you've got a leaky gut, you can heal that. If you've got a change in your oral microbiome, you can deal with that. If you've got chronic sinusitis, Lyme disease, whatever, you can deal with these things and get people optimized again. And we just actually have a paper that's just been freely available online, posted, showing we have people with over a decade of sustained improvement, which is just unheard of before.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was, and until the movie that I watched was Memories of a Lifetime.
Memories for Life. Yeah, reversing Alzheimer's.
Memories for Life, reversing Alzheimer's. I got it on Amazon last night. And it's so amazing to see, even just like as a researcher and kind of going against the mainstream, and you're trying to do this, not just a one-stop shop pill that's going to change everything, which nobody's been able to find, and they're going after the symptom rather than the root cause. You found 36 plus root causes of Alzheimer's, and it's going to be a combination, like all these complex chronic conditions, right? Yes. And because you've been kind of swimming upstream, you've had to do this over time. But now that you've been able to show for 10 years that people have been able to reverse cognitive decline. So what I would like to know, it is fascinating, and I'm so grateful for your work. Just for the lay people like me, I know a lot, but I'd love for you to, I know my grandmother passed away, I guess. I don't really know if that was the cause, but she had dementia.
Yeah.
What is just the basic definitive difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? And then you mentioned brain shrinkage.
Yes.
I know that there's the amyloid plaque, and brain shrinkage is a problem. I'd love to know if we're able to regrow brain gray matter, because and plaque, and just like the physicality of it all.
Yeah, great point. And I should mention, just yesterday, an article came out saying miraculous reversal of autism. And very interesting. And you look at what these people did, it was very similar to what we're doing with Alzheimer's. As you said earlier, these are complex chronic conditions, whether you're talking about autism or Alzheimer's or Lewy body disease or cardiovascular disease. All these things are complex chronic conditions. It's a new world. We've got to quit this idea of, you just find one little single drug and it's going to cure everything. That's great for pneumococcal pneumonia. It does not work for Alzheimer's. So the idea here then is that, yes, you look and we see that there are three big drivers, and those are energetics, so reduced blood flow and things like that. And then the second thing is the inflammation. So whether it's because of metabolic syndrome or leaky gut or an infection you're unaware of, which is very common, by the way, all those things. And then the third thing is toxicity. It is remarkable how many toxins, as you know, that we are exposed to. It's everywhere. And you probably saw the recent work on microplastics. They are now in they look at mice all have microplastics. Humans all have microplastics. So to go back to your point, what is dementia versus Alzheimer's? So dementia means global cognitive decline. You're having trouble with your memory. You're having trouble with learning new things for your phone. You're having trouble with driving, all of that. Yeah, the most common cause of dementia is Alzheimer's. So Alzheimer's is actually a pathology. It was defined in 1906 by Dr. Alzheimer. And he showed that you get these plaques and tangles in your brain. So what happens is when you get this, as I mentioned earlier, you go through 4 stages. And that's actually, although people in the early stages say, I don't want to know, it's times have changed. If you find out early, you never have to get the dementia part. So the first phase you go through is asymptomatic. And this can be in your 20s or 30s, where you're looking at 20s, 30s, 40s. You find that you can take a blood test and it says, you were going to get it 20 years from now. But now that you know, you don't have to get it at all. Then you go through the second one is called SCI, subjective cognitive impairment. And that's often occurring in people's 40s and 50s. And they're saying, my memory isn't what it used to be. I'm not remembering phone numbers the way I used to. I'm not able to do some of the things. I'm having trouble learning a new language or my new iPhone or things like that. That is called subjective cognitive impairment. The good news on that, it's 100% reversible and it lasts about 10 years. So you can see we have a tremendous window of opportunity to get people better. So again, please don't wait. Very, very few people ever have to get this problem. And by the way, the true genetic cases of Alzheimer's, where it's just passed every time, 5%. 95% of us get sporadic Alzheimer's, where you have lots you can do. And in fact, it's not your fate necessarily. So if you don't do anything during the SCI phase, those 10 years, you then go on to the third phase, which is called mild cognitive impairment. And by definition, what that means is you now know there's something wrong, just like in SCI, but now you're not testing normally on cognitive tests. During SCI, you can still you can still make it up. You can do well enough to say, I can still score pretty well on these
It
tests.
passes like brain fog or something.
Exactly. And in fact, a lot of people that you brought up a good one, COVID has given so many people brain fog. And unfortunately, that is a precursor to down the line getting some Alzheimer's. People who had COVID are at increased risk for Alzheimer's. That's been published by good epidemiological researchers. So it is an issue. These same sorts of inflammatory processes are going on, especially with long COVID, that they are with Alzheimer's. So again, get on prevention, you'll do much better. MCI, each year then, about 10% of the people with MCI will convert to the fourth, which is dementia. By definition, what dementia means is you're now beginning to have trouble with your activities of daily living. Whereas in MCI, your test is not normal, but you can still usually do your job. You can drive. You can handle it. You may be kind of having a crutch through life, but you're still able to handle things. Whereas with dementia now, you may be forgetting to bathe. You may be forgetting, how to do some basic activities of daily living, trouble balancing your budget and things like that. Driving, a lot of people will say, I drove up to a stop sign in my own neighborhood and I just suddenly it hit me. I had no idea which way to turn. That's a relatively common one. So this is why, again, listen to yourself when that voice is telling you, hey, Kelly, things aren't what they were. Listen to it, because the earlier you start, the easier it is to get full reversal.
Okay, good to know. So should we talk about the APOE 4 genes? Because that's another way that we can test and know if we're at risk.
Absolutely. And most people do not know their status on ApoE. So apolipoprotein E is the most common genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease. 75 million Americans have one copy. Most don't know it, unfortunately. 7 million Americans have two copies. If you have no copies, and that's 3/4 of the population. So I checked myself, for example, I'm a 3/3, which is kind of vanilla. It's the most common one. My lifetime risk is about 9%. It's not zero, but it's not too high. If you have a single copy, and as I said, that's 75 million Americans, your risk goes up to 30%. And if you have two copies, your risk goes up to about 90%. Sometime during your life, you probably will get Alzheimer's, which is, again, why we want everyone to check, get on active prevention, and you will do great.
It's amazing that like this is not part of just basic healthcare. Like we should all learn this, especially if it's preventable. I mean, I know that we're heading this way, but considering the amount of people, I think, I don't know if the number is like 10% of the population are going to get dementia and Alzheimer's, and it's going to
About
bankrupt,
15% of the population. Great point. Yeah, it's very common.
like our society, our healthcare industry, like our economy can't sustain that number with, because it's very expensive at the end. So
Yes, and in fact,
if it's
so
preventable with the knowledge of like, okay, you're in these 3 risk categories, and then now we have these protocols it's preventable, mostly.
that's exactly right. And in fact, the fact of the matter is that this is going to bankrupt the healthcare system within the next 15 years or so if we don't have a way for prevention and successful treatment. It's a huge problem. And by the way, the average American who develops Alzheimer's will spend $350,000 before dying of Alzheimer's. Much of this, of course, on nursing homes. So again, this is something we want to get in early, prevent the problem, or treat it as early as possible.
So, do you want to go into the pre-code and the recode? And then I guess my one question that I really want to know is like how, because it's kind of generally adopted that Alzheimer's is kind of a death sentence within a certain window of time.
Yeah.
How far along can you be? What's the furthest person you have far along that you've reversed? Like, where's our scale of hope here? Like,
Yeah. Great point. So for PreCODE and ReCODE, we originally developed something called ReCODE, which is for reversal of cognitive decline. My colleague Lance Kelly suggested that term initially, ReCODE, reversal of cognitive decline. And it's worked very well. It was the first thing that reversed cognitive decline. We published the first paper. And by the way, these papers are available freely online. We published the first paper in 2014 with just 10 people, the first 10. Then we published another one in 2016 with 10 more. Then in 2018, we published one with 100 documented cases of reversal. Then 2 years ago, we actually published a proof of concept trial where we showed that people could get better reproducibly. 84% of those people actually got better. We're now in the midst of a randomized controlled trial at 6 different sites around the country. That'll be finished next year. And by the way, another Dr. Heather Sanderson independently did a trial on this and got the same results that we did. So we're seeing it reproducibly. Now, what happened was one of the people who is ApoE44, so already had started symptoms in her late 40s, is a woman named Julie G. She had started a website, and so we've been working with Julie. When we published the first paper back in 2014, she emailed me immediately and said, hey, I'm interested in this stuff, and I'm doing some things that are related to this and getting some good results. So great, we've been collaborating ever since. In that second book that you mentioned, The End of Alzheimer's Program, Julie and my wife, Dr. Aida Lasheen Bredesen, wrote a whole handbook within this second book of here are the specifics, the websites to go to, the dietary approaches, all the different things, how you're going to look for your inflammation, things that really give a lot of detail on this. So that's that's the idea of ReCODE. Now, she said, hey, but don't you need PreCODE, prevention of cognitive decline? So for people, and what's happened is you can imagine, a lot of people have tried to do minimally. So they say, I'm going to do PreCODE, but not ReCODE, when they really need ReCODE. The only reason to do PreCODE is you're in your 30s, you have absolutely no symptoms, you're doing great, there's no family history. For people who are at high risk, find out they're ApoE44, you don't want to mess around with that. It's kind of a light version of ReCODE because, again, it's a life and death issue. So I always tell the physicians, we've trained over 2,000 physicians in 10 different countries and all over the US. I always tell the physicians, when someone comes to you with cognitive decline, one of only two things will happen. You will help them or they will die. So, I mean, that is key. It's very much like having cancer. You're going to help or you're going to die. So we want to do everything possible to help people to get improvement and then to sustain their improvement. Now, you asked, how late can you do this? What happens is we see people with MoCA scores of 0 who get improvements, but they don't come all the way back. What they do is very striking. They will start speaking again. They will become continent again. They will interact with their families again. They'll learn to dress themselves again. But we've seen people go from 0 to 9 and from 19 or even 18 to 30. We've never seen anyone go from 0 to 30. My fervent hope is that our research will help us so that we can ultimately get someone from 0 to 30. We're not there yet. Therefore, please don't wait. Come in early and get treated, and the outcome will speak for itself.
And you likened it to cancer, which, it's so interesting. These, again, complex chronic conditions.
Yep.
Where there's multiple causes, all with, based around energetics. What was the second one? And then toxicity.
Inflammation, yeah.
Yeah. And like, it's just so clear that our environments are so saturated and the way we're living our life are so stress rooted. Like, at some point, we just need to change what's available in our environment. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we got to go back to what the consumer is able to get their hands on. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like so clear that obviously we're focused on fixing the scale right now, but we need to get to a place where we're not even allowing our citizens, our community, to get to a, below 25, because we live in a much more less toxic world. We got to heal the world. This is wild.
No, you're absolutely right. And you know what's really happened is that over the last 150 years, really with industrialization, we've made as a society a lot of assumptions that have turned out to be wrong. The assumption is we can build houses with wood that's gotten wet in the rain. It turns out that's great mold food, and people are living like, oh, this isn't a problem. No, it actually is. It drives your immune system activation. We've made the assumption we can live stress-filled lives and stay up all night and get our work done, and it just has turned out to be a horrible idea. We've made assumptions that we can eat ultra-processed food. Well, it's still food, right? No, it's turned out to be incredibly damaging. There are very good studies now on ultra-processed food increasing risk for Alzheimer's disease. We've assumed that we can live in areas of high air pollution. No, it turns out that is an increase in risk for Alzheimer's disease. So a lot of these assumptions that we've made over the last century and a half have just turned out to be incorrect. So going back to the old ideas, get outdoors, get some exercise each day. And I happen to love things like EWOT and KATSU. I mean, there's so many great things to do, as you know, with exercise. And so there are so many things. Obviously, you're an expert in this area. So there is so much that can be done that people are just not thinking about. And, even your oral microbiome, making sure you don't have a leaky gut, making sure you don't have a carb-filled diet. Just these basics can be so, so helpful to reducing risk.
Yeah, and sugar. I mean, you talk about the ultra processed foods, but sugar has such an effect on insulin and all these intricate processes of our bodies. And it's so, the assumption thing is so huge. We've made assumptions because we believe the authorities that are feeding us marketing information to get us to consume more. And we've kind of been programmed into these like, oh, convenience, comfort people. And it's just like killing us. Like, we've got to like snap out of these assumptions and actually like go back to, like you said, just basic alignment with nature and how we're designed, and and like turn off the TV and all of these toxic programs that are being subconsciously downloaded in your head, and these that which lead us to these assumptions because we're giving our power away.
Exactly. And we understand it's really it's profit versus health. And so as I've always said, you have to put outcomes ahead of incomes. And so, we got to focus on those outcomes. We understand the incomes for the pharmaceutical companies are hundreds of billions if they can get these Alzheimer's drugs, which don't work very well, out there. So we want to focus more on the outcomes and less on the incomes.
And then we can have, and then it's just this like micro to macro. Once the outcomes are coming, then we're healing through teaching people how to prevent Alzheimer's and cancer through these lifestyle protocols and getting back in touch with nature. All of a sudden, the consumer is demanding a different way of life, and business, industry, society changes. It's just so your work is really like pivotal to healing society and the world as well. But so what is like, break down the ReCODE, because I know you said kind of 84% is the sweet spot of like people reversing their cognitive decline. What's that 16-ish%? Why isn't that effective for them? And what's the protocol kind of look like?
Yeah, great point. And we find that there are the people who get better have a profile, and the people who don't get better have a profile in general. Yeah. The profile of the people who get better is that they're invested. They get in this and they literally live it for 6 months or more, and they're getting in there and they're changing. They're getting a plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. They're identifying the toxins that are there. They're detoxifying. Their families are often supportive. They often work with a health coach who's really, and I think health coaches have had a major impact on outcomes because they're the ones that are interacting so much with the various patients and are actually helping them to get on the right track. And they're being good psychologists and they're understanding the medicine part of it. So that makes a huge difference. And then not having a doctor, often we'll see someone who's not doing well. Yeah, I went to my other doctor who said, oh, we don't do this. This is just take this drug. There's nothing you can do. It's really sad. It's the whole, the old nocebo effect. Very sad. So as far as how you actually do this, there are two pieces to it. So there's the general piece, which is the 7 basics. And then there's the specifics, because each person has this for a different reason. It's almost like a fingerprint. You have a certain amount of each contributor. And as you mentioned, there are over 36 different contributors. We initially identified 36. There are a few more that we've identified now, but it's not thousands. That's the good news. It's dozens. So what we do is we start with the 7 basics, and that is diet. And as I mentioned, plant-rich, mildly ketogenic diet. So you have to be able to go back and forth between glucose utilization in your brain and ketone utilization. Those are the only 2 things your brain uses. So you got to be able to go back and forth. Interestingly, most people who have cognitive decline have lost both of those. They get insulin resistant from a high carb diet typically, and therefore they're now not able to use glucose appropriately. But because of the high insulin, that prevents them from making ketones. So when I see these people, their brains are literally sputtering. It's like having a Prius where you got 2 different ways to fuel the Prius, and now you're out of both. And so you're barely making it. And so what we do is we restore their insulin sensitivity, and we then restore their ability to make ketones. And often we just give them some ketones at the beginning just to help them along, because your brain needs the energy. So it's diet, exercise, sleep, stress, brain training, detox, and some targeted supplements. Those are the basics. Then beyond that, as we get people going on that, we start to look more deeply. Do you have specific toxins? Which ones? How can we get you off those toxins? How can we get them away from you? What have you been doing that we can help fix? Is your house filled with mycotoxins? That sort of thing. And then infections. Are there some inflammatory things? Do you have a tick-borne illness? Many people don't realize they have a tick-borne illness. Babesia, Bartonella, Borrelia, all these different things, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, these are all different organisms. And when you get them, they will set up this mild chronic infection. Of course, the latest one is to have COVID. And COVID has come back yet again this summer, as you know. It's everywhere once again. And what it does is it triggers the innate immune system, and the adaptive system isn't able to clear it. And so you have this mismatch where you just got this chronic inflammation. Now, when you get COVID acutely, what do you die from? You die from cytokine storm. In Alzheimer's, the same thing happens, but you die on from cytokine drizzle. It's less activation, but it's for years and years and years. And it just keeps that inflammatory cycle going in your brain. And so your brain says, okay, I have to switch my resources from connection to protection. So you get brain fog and you say, I'm not using my resources to make new memories and learn new languages and learn new jobs because I've got to focus them on killing microbes and detoxifying and things like that. So we want to bring you back from protection back to connection by getting rid of the things that your brain was protecting itself from. So those are the key issues. Now, I should just mention one thing about sleep. It's so important. You got to get 7 hours, as I mentioned earlier. 7 hours. Get your REM, get your deep sleep of at least an hour a day, and make sure you don't have sleep apnea.
And sleep apnea, I feel like is common, and there's not that many causes. I mean, cures besides like the CPAP or whatever. What are you seeing in that area?
It is, you're right, it's getting better. 80% of sleep apnea goes undiagnosed. That's been published and validated. Now, we had a guy recently who said, if I have sleep apnea, I will kill myself rather than do CPAP. So I get it. People do not like CPAP. Some people have no problem with it and they do great, and it helps their thinking and it helps their breathing. All that's great. But you're right. Some people don't like it. The good news is there are more and more things you can do. One of the things is it's often brought about by some systemic inflammation. So people will go from having some sleep apnea, they get rid of the inflammation. Guess what? Now they don't have sleep apnea anymore. Of course, things like sleeping on your side can be very helpful as opposed to sleeping on your back. The main thing is checking, making sure that you're addressing it one way or another. There are now some surgical procedures, of course, as well. There are dental devices, especially for those who have mild sleep apnea, which is an apnea-hypopnea index of greater than 5. If you're up at 40, that's severe sleep apnea. But if you're down at 6, 7, 10, that's mild sleep apnea. And so then you can do things like just put a dental device. It's benign, and it will keep your jaw forward so that you don't have problems. So again, there are all sorts of things to do. Don't stop until you're satisfied, until your oxygenation is good. Maybe you're one of these people who just doesn't want to do CPAP. Okay, there are some alternatives.
Yeah. What I love, and I really get this from watching the documentary that you were in, and I'm sure from reading your books, which I'll get to as soon as I can, because this is so fascinating. But it's so bio-individual. It's so specific to the individual, and the 7 or 10 people that you followed in the documentary, and you listed on the side like what their causes were. So this woman had mycotoxins, infection, leaky gut, and boom. And this other guy had heavy metals and this gene, and so it was so specific. And then you could treat the detox pathways or the protocols differently and very bespoke to the individual. And we have the technology and the feedback to get the data for each person. And that's where we should be for how advanced we are in medicine for each person. And that's how, one pill is not going to be the magic thing. I mean, we would hope, but it's so complex of all these different offenders or insults going on in the body that you really have to address them all in a certain process.
It's so true. Medicine for many, many years has been about make a diagnosis and then write a prescription or send the person to surgery. That's been, what we do. And so now what's happened in the 21st century, we're switching from all these simple illnesses that were killing us in the last century things like tuberculosis and HIV and things like that. We're switching now, as you said, this is a more complex scenario now. What we're really finding is that human physiology is complicated. It's beautiful and complicated. Your body can do so much. Your brain can do so much. If you just look at the ability of your brain to store information, you can store in your brain the information of about 3,000 home computers in one little inside your skull. That's 3,000. So just a tremendous amount. Our nervous systems have evolved so beautifully. And so no surprise, you have to look at all the different pieces. It takes the energy. It takes not too much inflammation. It takes not too much drag. It takes not too much toxicity. If you've got the greatest supercomputer in the world, and you start pulling the power out and pulling out the plug, and then you start, you're turning down the Wi-Fi, and you're starting to mess up, and you're throwing water on it, and you're messing up the circuits. It's just not going to work correctly. And we're in that same situation. The great news, as you said, all of these things are now addressable. 10 years ago, people didn't know what to address. They thought there was nothing. And so the common saying back then was, nothing can prevent, reverse, or delay Alzheimer's. That is a totally outdated statement now. Again, the new statement should be, nobody needs to get this, virtually nobody needs to get this disease. Get in early, get evaluated, get on prevention or earliest treatment, and you'll find all these different things. And each one is indeed addressable, just as you said.
Talk to me about this double-blind randomized control trial that's happening right now, because when the documentary was made, you were up against, you got denied a few times, and
Yep.
got some naysayers in there, and it was so fascinating to just witness kind of the closed-mindedness of it all, but or kind of profit-driven angle of it all. But talk to me about the trial that's going on right now, what your hopes are, what you're seeing, and do you think that people will, based on the results that you assume, based on your past work, will be demonstrated, do you think that will shift things?
I hope so. As you said, people keep saying, raising the bar. Well, you didn't do enough cases. Then we did 100 cases. They said, well, you didn't do a trial. Well, then we did a trial and that worked. They said, well, you didn't do a randomized control trial. Okay, so now we're doing a randomized control trial. Then they're going to say, well, but you have to do it with 100,000 people. It's just going to keep on going. So I go back, years ago, I got a pathologist named Dr. Dana Farber, looked at people. There was childhood leukemia. There was no treatment. There was nothing that could be done for it. He noticed that people who got folate as part of a treatment for anemia did worse. And he thought, well, maybe we should be doing the opposite. Let's inhibit the folate metabolism. Maybe that will help. He reported 6 patients. 2 of them, they killed with this. Accidentally, of course. It was a side effect of the medication, most likely, as he said. 2 of them did, yeah, but 2 of them actually showed improvement. And this was the first. And this became what is now the standard of care for childhood leukemia, where most people survive. So we're in a very similar situation where 10 years ago, there was nothing for Alzheimer's. You put a person on a drug and you tell them you're going to die, nothing. We showed, here are the first ones. And the great news is the side effects of what we're doing don't kill people. They actually make your blood pressure better. They make your weight better. They make your glycemic control better. People will get off their antihypertensives, get off their anti-diabetes drugs. They often can get off their statins as well. It makes your lipid profile better because you are doing more physiologically relevant things to improve. So we are in the midst of a randomized controlled trial. Very excited to be working with 6 absolutely spectacular functional medicine physicians. We're here with Dr. Christine Burke right over here in Sacramento, and Dr. Ann Hathaway, Dr. Kat Toops, Dr. Nate Bergman, who's in Cleveland, Dr. Craig Tanio, who's down in Florida, and Dr. David Hasse, who's in Nashville. So very excited to be working with them. They are all fantastic. They've all gotten excellent results in their patients. And so they are now all doing this randomized controlled trial. It should be finished next year. The good news, we have now new things you can look at. So we now can look at your p-tau. We can see whether people are getting better or worse there. We can look at things like CNS vital signs, which is a very sensitive cognitive test. We can look at your MRI volumetrics. And you mentioned, do you actually see improvements? Yes, we do. And we reported that in our last trial. The gray matter volume, which goes down a few percent per year and goes down more rapidly in people with Alzheimer's, in these people who had MCI mostly or early dementia with Alzheimer's, their gray matter went up, not down. And Carrie Rutland, who's an excellent health coach in New York City, has now reporting a patient who wonderful results where she went from less than the first percentile in her parietal lobe to the 22nd percentile. Just a drum. I mean, it was basically virtually gone, less than the first percentile, to a very reasonable 22nd percentile, and dramatic improvements in her hippocampal volume as well, and temporal lobe and occipital lobe. So really good news. So if you do the right things, if you provide that support and you minimize the toxicity and the inflammation, yes, we repeatedly see increases in brain volumes. And we don't yet know, is this mostly because of new connections or is this actually new cells? We don't know yet.
Yeah, I don't know that either. But as you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, it makes so much sense. If we are bombarding with all of these insults to the brain, from toxicity to stress to inflammation to lack of oxygen and all these things, then we switch into protection mode from connection mode. If we're not making new connections and new synapses and getting new, neural activity, then the brain matter shrinks because it's not needed. But if you take away the offenders that are constantly bombarding and you don't need to be in protection mode, then you're back in connection mode and the system can work as and nature regenerates, right? It's just like, to me, the layperson, it makes so much sense,
Yes, and it's just that it's a complete change in the way we think about these illnesses. They've been called illnesses of misfolded proteins and aggregated proteins and all these sorts of things. Yeah, those things are present in these illnesses, but that's not the big picture. That's not what this is all about. And so this now gives us a much better theoretical framework. We can see how to prevent it. We can see how to treat it. We can see what we're doing wrong, and we can see how to do things right.
I know. And the term holistic, it's such a, woo-woo bad rap, but it's like, you have to pull, the little scientist has to pull its eyeball out of the microscope, take the picture, take in the big picture, take a whole view, the 360-degree view of what's really going on to find out, and that's, hopefully we're shifting that in all medicine. But as you said, people that follow the ReCODE program, because you're removing offenders, are improving in cardiovascular health, cholesterol, insulin, it's like the whole system is coming back online and functioning the way it's supposed to. And it affects every chronic condition. I mean, it should be applied to kind of most chronic conditions, I would imagine.
Yeah, so when we were doing all these test tube experiments and making transgenic mice, we made Alzheimer's, we made Alzheimer's in fruit flies, all these different things to study the cell culture models, all this years and years in the lab. My wife said to me, and she is an integrative physician. She said, whatever you guys find in the lab, it's going to have something to do with basics like sleep and like, what you're eating and stuff. And I said to her at the time, no. We're going to find one molecule with one fold. We're going to develop a drug for that one thing, and it's going to be a cure. It's like, I should have listened to her all those years ago, because it turned out we came full circle. When we could see how all these molecules worked, you step back and you see it's part of this beautiful picture of connection and protection and how your brain manages that. And, with our country, when COVID came, very much like what happens with Alzheimer's, COVID came in, we have a new insult, we switched from the day-to-day, everyone said shelter at home, socially distance, don't go into work. And what happened? We go into a recession. And that's exactly what's going on in your brain as you're switching over from connection mode to protection mode.
And is there still that potential for the people with the 4 copies of the ApoE4 or 3? Could there be a magic bullet for that misfolding or the copy
Yeah.
5% population.
I am so glad you brought that up because we looked at this for years. So we looked at what is it. And so first of all, people who are ApoE44 can go on. So that you get one copy from your mother, one copy from your father. If you have two copies, you're at very high risk, but there's a lot you can do about it. However, you're right. Wouldn't it be nice to have a drug as part of this protocol that would really help you? So we looked at this, and what happens is ApoE, we discovered that it enters the nucleus, interacts with 1,700 different genes. So it's literally changing the instructions for the readout of your DNA. As we used to say, ApoE is something that carries fats. So it's like your butcher. It turns out it goes into the nucleus and changes the laws of the land. So it's also like your senator. It's changing how your DNA is read. So what we found is that you can actually develop a medication that changes it so that it doesn't go to the DNA and shut down all those things, which produces more of a pro-inflammatory state. Literally, the ApoE4 is putting you into chronic protection mode. So it's great if you're living in a third world country and you've got all sorts of gut parasites and things like that. It's great. But if you're not, it's actually, unfortunately, a liability. So therefore, you want to really keep your inflammation down, really keep your energetics up. You kind of have to double down. We did discover a very good drug candidate. So I'm trying to get people interested in this now. And just talked to a group, a large drug company, and they said, too early, we want it down. Everybody wants it to be proven before they get interested in it. But this is a completely new approach. It is, to me, the holy grail for ApoE4 because everybody who has ApoE4. So my hope is that we'll get enough grassroots interest from the ApoE4 community to help push this thing forward because this could really change the world for people who are ApoE4.
Nice. Amazing. So if someone's listening, they're concerned about their parent, maybe concerned about themselves, where should they go first? What should they, pick up your book, go to your website, take the mic, Cognoscopy? Yeah.
Yeah, this is such a good point because different people like to kind of start different ways. Some people like to listen to podcasts. Some people like to buy a book. Some people like to read a published paper. And the good news, all those are available. The easiest way, of course, is just to watch the documentary. It's available on Amazon Prime. Michael Bublé did a great job with his narration. I really appreciate that he did that. He, of course, has Alzheimer's in his family. And so he was interested in supporting the cause. So I'm so grateful to him. He did an excellent job. That's the easiest, just to see it. Because to me, hearing from the people who actually improved is the most convincing. And that's why I wrote the third book, which was The First Survivors of Alzheimer's. I asked 7 different people who had improved, would you write your story? Because it's so impressive just to hear their stories. If you can get that through that book without a tear in your eye, then you're a strong person because the stories these people had, being told by their doctors, you're going to die. There's nothing you can do. Watching their grandmothers, mothers die, and then now they're getting the same thing and looking at the children and saying, oh my gosh, they're all going to be subject to this, and then getting better. There's nothing better than seeing that. So that's an easy way to get started. You can also go, there's this new test out. You can go to Get a Brain Scan. We're calling it Brain Scan, but it's a blood test developed by Dr. Hans Frickman, MD, PhD, fantastic researcher, who developed the most sensitive test for phospho-tau. Good for all of us. I'm actually getting it myself. I just got the kit. So I'm gonna now get my blood drawn and get my own just to check to see so that I'll know, do I need to work a little harder currently? You can also follow those over time to make sure that you're getting better. So that's another good way. You can go to mycognoscopy.com and get a cognoscopy. And you can, again, do that online. Pretty easy to do, getting those blood tests that I mentioned. So lots of ways to get started, but for everyone, please make sure that you get evaluated, get on active prevention or earliest treatment. Please don't wait. We hear these sad stories so often with people who waited until they were in late stage dementia, and it is much harder then.
Yeah, watching that film, it was, I mean, I was like crying, like crying at like multiple things because you just see, and if there's, you know, my mother's mother, you know, we didn't know what to do. It just was a thing that we just thought it was what happens to old people, you know, and now I'm sure my mom has anxiety that it's going to happen to her. And I've been hearing things around, you know, supplements to take for brain health and cognitive, you know, slow down cognitive decline. But now it's like we have a path forward, and the sooner that you get to that, dive in and get the feedback and get the data on your own, you know, markers, like the sooner we can prevent or reverse the beginnings of it. So I'm just so grateful that you have done this work despite a lot of, you know, backlash, and you're doing amazing work that's very aligned with my kind of philosophy of healing and just my awe and wonder of this human body, and you're figuring out how to support it and sharing it with the world. So I really appreciate you. And where can people work with you still? How do they find out more about you? Do you have a website?
Yeah, so there is I'm on Facebook, Dr. Dale Bredesen, on X, on Instagram. They could go any of those things. Again, you know, read some of the papers. Yes, we're always looking for people who are interested in helping spread the word, and I'm so grateful that you're helping spread the word on this. You know, we hear so much now about anti-aging, and we hear so much about AI. Both of those things are coming to fruition, but they're not quite there yet. You know, AI is going to change the world, but it's just starting. And if anything, it's maybe interfering with some college teachers reading their students' essays. But this is available. ReCODE is available today, so it's making sure that people can reverse their cognitive decline and can prevent their cognitive decline. So, you know, getting you know, any of those ways to get started, fantastic. And again, thank you so much, Kelly, for spreading the word.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
Good luck with the trial.
Thank you. Yes, I'm excited about it.
Thank you for listening to the Heal with Kelly podcast. Be sure to tune in every Thursday for more empowering wisdom and inspiring healing stories. And make sure you hit the follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss that one episode that holds the answer you've been searching for. Oh, and if you found this episode inspiring, please rate, review, and share Heal with Kelly so that we can grow our audience and reach more people. We truly appreciate it. Lots of love.